Is it better this way?
Or can you hear me okay this way? Okay, so I'm going to just talk and you tell me if you can't hear me. So my name is Candace Till, and I'm the director of the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University for about the next month. And then I'll be the director of the Open Learning Initiative at Stanford University, because I've accepted a faculty position at Stanford. So the Open Learning Initiative will still continue. It'll just continue in a distributed way between the two institutions, and then hopefully engaging a lot more institutions as well. So what I thought I would do is start off just kind of giving you a quick overview of what it is we're doing, and then we can, if you want to, try some interactive stuff, maybe some keywords scattered around if folks want to try some stuff. And also, raise some interesting questions right before the session started about where is all this open and online stuff that's happened in the last year, what's the implications for that going forward for higher education and for teaching and learning. And so I'm hoping we can have a really interesting conversation about that. So this session is really for you to get what you want to know out about what's happening in online and open learning. So don't hesitate to sort of stop me, tell me to take it in a different direction, whatever, so you get your most use out of this session. Okay, but first I'll give you an overview, because there's lots of stuff going on in this space. So the Open Learning Initiative started back in 2002, way before all the MOOC craze. And what the Open Learning Initiative is open, online learning environments that are based on the science of learning and designed to improve both quality and productivity in higher education. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit as we talk. The first thing I want to talk about is the science of learning. What that is, it's essentially an emerging science now that's made up of cognitive psychology, social psychology, computer science, anthropology, lots of people coming together to really study human learning and create science out of it. Now, it's a newer science. It's kind of not like physics in that we're still learning a lot about how people learn and learn a lot every day. But we take what we basically know from the science of learning and try and extract principles for informing our course design, and then use those principles as we're designing our learning environments. So, for example, one of the things we know from lots of research is that feedback, context-specific, targeted feedback given to the student at the time they're trying to engage in problem solving really has a very large impact on improving their learning. So if we know that, then how do we take that information to design a learning environment? So I'll give you an example out of our engineering statics course. How many engineers? Okay, I didn't know who was going to be here, so I wasn't sure what kind of an example to pick that would resonate for you. So anybody remember anything like that? Anyway, so this is about the learning experience. So in engineering statics, one of the things we want to do is have the people be able to sum concurrent forces. So we represent the forces as three vectors. And we ask them what is a pretty straightforward question. What's the magnitude and the direction of the sum? So this is good because probably none of you know how to do this, right? So if you were engaged in this activity, you would have already, before you got to this part of the course, had been sort of walked through how to do this. But here you are, you're in what we would call a did I get this? That means you've gone through, a little bit of a learning experience, and you're trying to check for yourself, can you do this? So the system gives you the problem, and it asks you simply, what's the magnitude of the sum? You type in the answer. The system immediately tells you, no, that's not quite right, because it can immediately evaluate your answer. And you can ask for a hint at any point when you're stuck. And the hint reminds you that the purpose of this particular activity is for you to be able to assess your own knowledge. So you might want to try and struggle through it a bit more, but if you're really stuck, don't know what to do, that's okay, ask for some help. And so if you ask for some help, the system will expand and say, now remember, the first step in summing these vectors is to resolve each of the forces into its components. So can you do that? So with the first force, can you resolve it into its components? Let's say you're stuck again. You have no idea how to do that. You can ask for a hint, and it reminds you how to think about doing that first decomposition. And if that's not enough, then you can ask for the next hint, and it it actually gives you the equation to use. If that's not enough, you can get asked for the next hint, which basically tells you it's 7.49. Now, we call this the bottom out hint. You probably call it the answer. So the idea is you give the student the answer, they can type it in, and then they can move to the next step. Now, when they're doing this, they're essentially going to be doing the same process 6 times. Yes, 6 times. So, and each time, maybe they can do it the next time without asking so many hints. So, if we go forward, they've been able to do this sub-step. Great that you can do this sub-step. Now, can you answer the original question? If you can, go ahead and do that. If you can't, you can keep going. I'm not going to walk you through the entire problem, but you can see this student has used pretty much all the scaffolding and hints available to be able to answer this problem, which they can do now. And the system's like, great that you can do that, but we would have expected you to be able to do that without asking for all these hints and feedback. So if you want to try again, click here, and we'll give you another chance. And all the hints, all the feedback, everything changes to support the student where they are at that particular problem. You got a question?
Sort of answer it. The idea is that for a particular student, you got diagnostics. If they have trouble with that particular type, you go to the database so that the next problem is going to reinforce. I mean, you may have to do a similar problem 4 or 5 times, whereas somebody got the answer right the first time, they move on faster.
Right, so did everyone hear what he was talking about? What you're talking about is personalized learning or adaptive learning.
Right, yeah.
And this is where you're understanding, where you're watching how the student's learning and what they're doing to be able to essentially personalize learning to that student's needs. Exactly. Okay, so and that, building on what you're just talking about, is work we've been doing at Carnegie Mellon for about the past 15 or 20 years in this area called cognitive tutors. Now, what cognitive tutors are simply a piece of software whose design are based on cognitive principles and who act like a good human tutor. So as you can see, what that piece of software was doing is when the student needed, it was always there to answer a question if the student needed help. It gave the student feedback when the student needed feedback. If the student was just moving along, as you discussed, it would not interact. So that's kind of like how we want a good human tutor to perform. But you might all be saying, okay, that's great for things like summing vectors, for procedural fluency, which is really important. But higher education, or the things we want workers to learn, is more than just getting fluent in particular skills. Part of what we want people, especially in higher education, to be able to do is to be able to take all those skills and concepts that they're learning, be able to synthesize them and apply them to new problems. So if you know how to sum force vectors, that's great. But if you come upon an engineering design problem, and you're stuck, and you don't know that summing force vectors is what you need to do at that point in time to solve that problem, then we wouldn't really say that you've learned it. So it's not just collecting this bag of tricks, but having a much more robust conceptual construct that you can draw on to confront new problems and apply them. So when we design our environments, we're also thinking about that. How do we design environments that encourage students to practice synthesizing and applying all of this discrete knowledge? So, for example, in our chemistry course, chemists in the room? Okay.
Basically, economists or businessmen.
Okay, great. Then we'll give you some other examples. And but you guys work with chemists, right? Okay, so when we teach chemistry, there's rather than teaching students stoichiometry,
We're learning all the time.
pardon?
We're learning all the time.
That's great. Rather than saying, okay, now we're going to teach you stoichiometry, we give them, which is a tool that chemists use to balance equations. But so we give them a real-world problem, which is the arsenic contamination of the water supply in Bangladesh. I bet you guys know that's a real problem.
No, the rice has the arsenic because of the water.
Yeah, and then the rice gets the arsenic because of the water. So having the water contaminated with arsenic is a real world problem, and it's a problem that chemists can be brought to bear to solve. So we give them first a little tiny documentary, really short, explaining the problem, and then we put them in the role of chemist. And the first thing that they get in their role of chemist is a sample from a well. And they get given this virtual lab to analyze the well water sample, and they're asked the simple question, is this water safe enough to drink? Are the levels of arsenic safe enough to drink? And to answer that question, they get told that the World Health Organization recommends arsenic in drinking water is 10 micrograms per liter. So as long as this sample has 10 micrograms per liter or less, it's safe. So they analyze the sample in the lab, and what do they see? No place on their solution analyzer do they see how many micrograms per liter. They get told how many moles of arsenic are in the water, which is another unit of measure that chemists use. But in order to then answer that question, they have to be able to do the translation from molarity to micrograms per liter. Again, and that is in stoichiometry a really fundamental step. So they can go ahead and just type it in. They can get the hints and feedback like you saw before. If it's clear that they have no idea what they're doing, then they can get put into a just-in-time learning experience that actually walks them through how to do the dimensional analysis. And then on top of learning how to synthesize and apply things, learning how to procedural skills, there's also, we want students to develop what we call better metacognitive skills. So it's great to be in this highly structured environment supporting them to learn, but for the most part, most of the time when you're trying to learn stuff, you don't get those kinds of highly structured supportive environments. So part of what we're also trying to help, especially college students do, is develop a better sense of monitoring their own learning. I mean, one of the things that we see, any of you who've taught in colleges, usually freshmen especially come in with a horrible way of, they don't really know when they know things. They're often, they think they know something, they don't really know it. So part of what we're trying to help them build is, how do you know when you know what you need to know? And then what do you do if you don't know what you need to know? So at multiple points during the activity, they get one of these activities, which is basically just asking them to stop and reflect on what we're hoping they've learned up to that point in time. And what's important about this is we don't ask them things like, do you, okay, this is statistics. People get statistics. Yay! Okay, let's do a statistics example. So this is, so when we design our modules, we always articulate what the student-centered and observable outcomes are for that module. And then we basically tell the students, working through this module, this is what we hope you're going to be able to do. And then before we have them take any high-stakes assessments, we ask them, this is what we're trying to get you to be able to do. How confident are you that you can do this? But we don't just ask them something like, do you understand sampling distribution? Because they can't answer that question. But what we can say, could you summarize and describe the distribution of a variable in context? Then they can say, the first one, not at all yet. Like maybe, I don't even know what you're asking me. To number 5, which is, I could do this on my own really well. And like a 3 would be, I could probably do this if I got some support. So if I looked at the material, if I asked a friend. But we're asking them to reflect on these things that we think are important. How well do you believe you could do this right now? And so the students answer those questions, and then they can use that information to decide whether or not they feel ready to move forward and take a high-stakes assessment. We don't stop them. We don't do any gating. It's their choice, because we're trying to help them develop that skill themselves. But then after they do the high-stakes assessment, we give to them, as well as to their instructor, what they thought about their own learning, and then what our assessment would tell us about their competence on those outcomes. And this gets back to one of my key points, which is one of the things as the students are working through it, as you mentioned this, as the students are working through all of these activities, they're getting all that support and feedback, which is helping them. But the other thing that's happening is we're collecting every interaction that they make. And we use that to drive feedback not just to the student, but to the other actors in the system. For example, the instructor. So rather than, and the way that this works is rather than saying to your students, read through chapter 10, I'll stay with statistics, of the statistics textbook and do the homework assignments and do that before you come to class next week, what you can say to the students is work through module 3 of the OLI course. Do the interactive activities, and if we're meeting, let's say I teach on Mondays and Wednesdays. I'm telling you this on Wednesday, I'll say work through module 3 before Sunday night at 10 o'clock. And the reason I want you to work through module 3 before Sunday night at 10 o'clock is because I need some time between 10 o'clock Sunday night and 10 o'clock Monday morning when we meet to kind of see how you guys are doing. And so the students work through it, they get all the hints and feedback, the system's accumulating all this data, and then we produce what we call the instructor dashboard. And I did pick this out of statistics. So this is out of the, an actual snapshot of an actual instructor dashboard out of the class. That's actually running. So this is out of module 2. And this is, so you can see we have the learning outcomes for this module.
So this is an aggregate of all the students.
This is an aggregate of the students in that one instructor's class.
So concept 4 is really running.
Very good. So he instantly sees how to do this. So what I can quickly see, if I've got like 10 minutes before I go into my lecture, I can say, okay, they're doing okay here, they're doing okay here. This is the one where I need to pay some more attention. And if that's all I've got time to do, I can just say, okay, so this is relate measures of center and spread to the shape of the distribution and choose the appropriate measure in different contexts. Now, for people who don't know statistics, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. For people who know statistics, you kind of get what we're talking about. So I might think, okay, how do I need to change my lecture accordingly? Now, if I've got a little more time, I'll say, let me see what's going on there. I can click in. And so I can click on that bar, and I can see a couple more things in detail. One of them is, what's the distribution of students that make up that bar? Oh, I didn't mention that, what coloring on the bar means. So the students in green, that means that we would predict that those students, if we were to give them a test today, the test that would fail it. The students in orange, we're saying their learning is moderate. They're doing okay. The students in red, they're working, they're trying it, but they clearly are struggling. What about the students in gray? What does that tell us? Anybody got a guess?
They didn't do it.
Yeah, they haven't done anything, or at least they have not done enough work in the system for our modeling to make any kind of prediction that we feel comfortable telling. Okay, so I can click down that way. I can also click down on this side, which is that larger outcome, has a bunch of sub-skills and sub-concepts associated with it. So I can see, okay, maybe a big part of the reason why they're having trouble relating the measures of center and spread is because it looks like they're struggling a bit with computing the median. That seems to be, so I know how to focus the time that I spend with my students. I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing distributions, but I'm going to spend time relating centers of measures of center and spread, and I'm particularly going to spend time on this notion of how do you compute the median, because that seems to be where they're struggling. I don't think I did the slides. No, I didn't do it. But you can even click down further into this compute the median activity, and this compute the median concept, and see what are all the problems in which the students engaged, where they were asked to compute the median, and where did they struggle. And I want to say that when I'm talking about those kinds of problems, I don't mean that what we're saying to the student is, okay, now you're going to learn to compute the median. Here are 10 arrays of numbers, compute the median. What I mean is that students compute the median embedded in multiple activities as they're moving along, doing all kinds of interesting things. And every time they come up to a sub-step in an activity, like in the engineering statics tutor, where that sub-step is compute the median, then we're watching, could they do it or not? Did they ask for a hand or not? Okay, the other thing you can click in is you can click who are those students. So since this is actually a running course, I did remove the names, but you can see for this particular learning outcome, the instructor would get to see the student names, how many activities in this module they've attempted that's driving that prediction. And then there's some sort of helpful logistical things for instructors. You can select next to the student names or collect all the students and say, I want to send this email to all of those students. So you could, kind of communicate with the students in a grouping fashion by where they're struggling or where they're succeeding. You can also click onto any one of those students' names to see by student how are they doing. So if I click on a single student that was in that orange group, I can see that that particular student is doing just great on the other outcomes. This is the one that they're struggling a bit with. And I can also see the activities. Remember I said how many these are the activities in which they've engaged or not engaged that's driving that particular prediction. So you can see the idea is to give faculty tools that help them better get an immediate just-in-time picture of where the diversity of their students' knowledge is. And drilling down at whatever level works for that particular faculty member. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. So when people talk about the explosion of online or open or online environments in education, they'll talk about what's so great about them. Why is this so important? And usually they'll say one of three things. This one right here is the biggest one. That's meant to imply connectivity or access. So what's great about these online environments is students can learn anytime, any place they have a computer. And that's like everybody's talking about access. Access and convenience. But another power of these environments is this ability to do things with computers that it's really difficult to do in a classroom, like simulations. Like you can have students build bridges in a virtual environment and collapse them and nobody gets killed. You can show students the way molecules interact. You can really get an inside look at how equilibrium actually happens. So you can do really macro level things, really micro level things that's hard to do when you're just trying to do it in a classroom. So there's a real power of this simulation ability. And the last one is that, the internet basically connects students to the world. So they can connect to other students, they can connect to other experts, they can connect to material, basically to the world. And so these three big powers, the sort of access and convenience, the simulation capability, and the connectivity, the webness of it, those three things are really big. Well, what do you guys think? Which of those do you think is the biggest?
Big thing that seems popular now with the mass online courses, that's what.
Yes, that would be this one. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, it seemed to me the ability, of course, you could do that in a lab, if we got computer simulations and we've got a few labs to do it face-to-face. The technology will set it up, to me, go back more to assessment, the real-time feedback to the instructor. That's the technology side of it. For me, it makes no sense.
You get the prize. Because actually, while I think these three things are really important, I don't think they're the most important. I think the most important is exactly what you're talking about. And I call it the killer app. It's this. This is really the most important. It's essentially what Google has figured out. It's what Amazon has figured out. It's what Netflix has figured out. That you don't just use the technology to push stuff out. It's great to push stuff out, but you just push it out far enough so that the consumer, learner, whatever you want to, the person, is interacting in the interface. Because then that makes these systems great, big data collectors. And while Amazon and Google and Netflix, they all want to collect that data about you so they can understand you better as a consumer, we want to collect that data so that we can understand you better as a learner and understand learning in general. And so then that's why on my little graphic here, there is feedback to the student, which we've talked about. There's feedback to the instructor, which we've also talked about. But there are two other groups on my chart that are also getting this stream of data from the student interactions. So the students get the stream of data from just their interaction. The instructor gets a representative of the stream of data from that instructor's class's interactions. The next group that I'm going to talk about, which is the course design team, gets the stream of data from all of the students and all of the classes that are taking introductory statistics. that semester. So this is our design process. What's different about kind of what we're doing than what a lot of the MOOCs are doing is we do not go to individual faculty and say, oh, you want to put your economics course online? Great. Let's put a little video camera in front of you. Let's get you some questions. Let's slap your course up online. What we do instead is we bring together teams of multiple statistics or economics faculty, learning researchers, software engineers, human-computer interaction experts, universal design for learning specialists, students, and we bring all these people together to think through if we were going to create an effective environment for introductory statistics, what would we want students to be able to do and know, and how do we use the affordances of the technology and what we know about how people learn to design that environment. So that's that first group. And then once we create the first iteration, then we have a bunch of other faculty out in the world that are sort of saying, yeah, I want to be part of this. I don't have time to actually write it, but I want to give input to it. I want to sort of see how you guys are doing and tell you what's going on. And then once you get a first pass pilot of it, then I'll use it in my class and get feedback from my students and give you feedback from my perspective as an instructor about how it needs to be improved. And that goes back to the design team. And then we have a much greater group of faculty and students in institutions all over the country that then use the environment, and again we keep collecting the data as the interactions from the students, but also feedback from the faculty to continuously improve it and make it better and better and better. And the fourth loop on my little chart is to the science of learning. And that is, so the student gets their data, the instructor gets the data for their class, the course design team gets the data for all of the classes that they're designing on, like statistics. The learning science researchers get the data across all the classes, chemistry, statistics, whatever. And what do they do with that data? Well, I'm fortunate that at Carnegie Mellon, the sister project to my project is this Pittsburgh Science of Learning Center, or Learn Lab. And it's an NSF-funded learning research center. They got 10 years, $50 million, and the whole purpose of what they're supposed to be doing is generating and refining theories of human learning. And we have this nice synergistic relationship because the OLI courses are a perfect research lab because they can introduce tightly controlled experiments into the online environment and collect the data, but the experiments are happening in real classrooms over long periods of time, which solves a bunch of problems in traditional educational research. So, and the other thing the Pittsburgh Science and Learning Center has spent a not inconsiderable amount of its money on is on the back-end analysis tools. So we're collecting all this data out of our courses and we ship it over into what we call the data shop, and then they've developed tools where we can analyze and make meaning out of the data that we're collecting. For example, this is one kind of analysis. Now, when I showed you guys the engineering statics tutor and we were going, and the students would go, hint, 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 type in the answer. Hint, 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 type in the answer. Did that bother anybody? Was anybody thinking, oh, my students are just going to go, hint, 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 type in the answer, and that's how they're going to, yeah, and students do that. The difference is we know, and we can interpret what it means that they are doing that. Because actually it doesn't always mean the same thing. But I'll get into that if you want more information on that. But basically, this y-axis is what we call the assistance score. That's the number of hints and the number of feedbacks that student got when they were confronting that knowledge component. Now, I don't mean a particular problem. I mean a knowledge component, which can be much smaller than a particular problem. A knowledge component can be, compute the median could be a knowledge component. So in all the activities where they came across an opportunity to compute the median, were they able to do it? Did they have to ask for hints? Did they get feedback? Etc. So the first time, and this is what we call learning curve analysis, and this is the kind of curve we like to see, because this tells us that learning is happening. So when the x-axis is the number of opportunities they had to demonstrate that knowledge. So when they first confronted that knowledge component, they needed a lot of hints and feedback. But over time, the number until down here, the number when they confronted we don't always see these. Sometimes it'll start up here and kind of go like that. What would that tell you?
They're always jumping right to the hint, to the answer.
Yeah, they're interacting with it, but they're not showing us that they're learning anything from it. That could show system gaming the system, but I won't get over there. So, and sometimes it'll start down here and go across. What would that tell you? Yeah, well, it actually tells you we're wasting their time, because we're giving them lots of practice on activities that they already know how to do. And then sometimes you'll get something that kind of goes like this, and then it flex up like that. Any guesses? That usually means that we misspecified the knowledge model. That something that we thought was a single knowledge component, when it got to that point, was actually a conflation of maybe, not only recognizing that they needed to compute the median and computing the median, but also applying it or something. That's actually two discrete conceptual constructs that we need to unpack. And what's cool about these tools is we can zoom in on any inflection point like that, look at what's going on, and say, oh, we need to either change the problems or we need to change the knowledge model. And this gets me to my point. So you might say, why do we know what works. I mean, everyone will say, oh yeah, we know what works. Why do we need to research learning? Well, oftentimes when people say we know what works, what they'll tell you is actually a pretty complex model of, if you only did it this way, your students would learn really well. And then so people come up with these little pilot projects, and they have really good success in their class, and then somebody over here says, okay, we'll try that. We'll get small classes with students in small study groups, working on interesting problems, and they do it in their class over here, and they don't get the same result. It doesn't transfer. Why does that happen? Well,
because there's a much broader context within which the learning occurs, and you're picking a tool that works in one context and trying to apply it in another context.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a bunch of contextual variables that I would also argue it's because they don't really understand in that what actually made it work in that context. And so just like novices learning any new field, like any new field, you'll have students that are trying to make sense. It's the classic novice expert studies when they gave physics faculty a whole bunch of physics problems and said categorize these. And the physicists categorized them on the solution relevant principles, the actual underlying mechanisms. And when you gave the same problems to first year physics students, they categorized them by, oh, this is an inclined plane problem. This is a pulley problem. Because they were categorizing them, what they saw in those problems were the surface features. Because they didn't have the depth of expertise to see what was really going on. And I would argue that is the big problem in learning right now. That we're looking at a bunch of surface features, trying to figure out what's actually causing learning to happen, but we don't really yet understand the underlying mechanisms or the underlying factors that combine in interesting and emergent ways to cause learning. So when you try and transfer on things that you think this is what's making it work over here and it doesn't work, just like with that novice physics student, it's probably because you haven't really understood why it worked over here. And that's why we still need a science of learning, because we get surprised all the time. Things that we think we know about why something works, and then you learn something completely different. And that's because what we know about our own learning is just the tip of the iceberg. And most of what we need to know about learning is actually down here. It's what we don't know yet. And that's one of the big powers of these environments is to be able to create rapid experimentation to be able to understand more about learning. So let me ask you this. So I've told you that student learning is invisible. You may or may not believe me. So let me ask you this question. So algebra. Everyone's here had algebra, right? Yay. Okay, good. So which of these three problems is actually harder for a beginning algebra student? They're exactly the same problem. So the first is the story problem. A waiter gets $6 per hour one night and he made $66 in tips, earned a total of $81.90. How many hours did Ted work? Okay. Or a word problem. Starting with some number, if I multiply by 6 and then add 66, I get 81.90. What number did I start with? Or an equation. X times 6 So, take a minute, and I'm going to ask you, how many people think that the story problem is the most difficult? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people think the word problem is the most difficult? How many people think the equation is most difficult? Okay, so anyone who thought that the story problem was the most difficult, why?
The equation, I know that the equation is easy to solve, so that's the you have to read it all. And actually, you have to construct the equation.
Okay, so did everyone hear his answer? That the reason the word problem is harder than the equation is because the equation you can just, that makes sense, you just go ahead and solve it. Whereas with the word problem, you have to read all of this, translate which of those factors to make into the equation so you can get to the equation to solve it. Okay, great. Word problem. Who thought the word problem was the hardest? Why? I know. Right. Oh, why?
Just because it's not in that real context, and the context that you can understand is just I look at the equation and I see it's pretty black and white, what you need to do to solve it, but the word problem, it's not really clear.
Okay, so it's missing some of the context. The equation is straightforward. It adds some stuff, but the context doesn't add context to really help you.
Then it's harder than the story problem because it's not in the context that you're able to understand. It's just words.
Okay, and you don't have the value that you get of the context of the word problem. Yeah.
That's what I was building, is that the word problem is much more than aloof, whereas the story problem students might be able to relate to. I've been in that situation. I know what it means. So they can translate that into their own personal experience. The other one is very academic. The bottom one is very straightforward.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so equation. The person thought the equation was the hardest. Anybody today think the equation was the hardest?
I misinterpreted your question.
Oh.
I thought you were saying easiest. So
Oh, okay, easiest. That's right. You're right. I was asking easiest. How many? Okay. Did anybody think? You're right. You are absolutely right. So who thought the equation was the easiest? Okay. So interestingly, so we actually did mix this. So back to the learning research question. We actually did a study, and the original purpose of this study was not to ask which is hardest, because we actually, being really smart people, thought it was obvious which was hardest. That the story problem is clearly the hardest for exactly the reason that you put forward. That in order to get to the equation, which they're going to solve, they have to translate from the word problem to the story problem. So in our cognitive model, that was actually multiple cognitive tasks. You have to take the word problem, you have to parse it to understand what it's telling you, then translate it into this symbolic framework, and then solve the symbolic framework, and then translate it back. Cognitively, much more complex. Therefore, much harder. And so we did but we were trying to understand that complexity. So we did a study with students, multiple studies with students, where we gave them multiple high-stakes exams that had all three forms on an exam to see, because we wanted to see their process, to unpack what was difficult. And we were shocked to find out that we were completely wrong. That actually, math educators say that the story problem or the word problem is the hardest. But the students, when you actually test students, the equations are the hardest. Why? Because the students are not like us. The students do more what you said. They never do the translation. That's not how they see the problem. They do this sort of means, ends, guessing analysis, where they take that first problem and they go, okay, that's probably maybe $10. Let me try that, and they run it through. Okay, that didn't quite work, and they sort of progressively narrow in, or they think about, but they don't. And we even did eye tracking studies to validate this. We had students sit in front of a computer and designed a screen so that they could, where we gave them this problem, and then gave them a little part down here in the screen to type in the equation, and we made them type in the equation before we allowed them to give the solution, because we were trying to, scaffold them to translate from the word problem to the equation. And so we scaffolded and they were able to translate from the word problem to the equation. But then when we opened up the screen and said, okay, what's the answer? Watching their eyes, they never looked at the equation again. They went back to their old process. It's actually a fascinating eye-tracking study. But anyway, and the other thing that's true is, so this is what we call the expert's blind spot, which is the more expertise you have in a field, the harder it is for you to see how novices really see the challenge. And in fact, when we did this, when we asked this same question that I just asked you, to high school algebra teachers, elementary school teachers, and middle school teachers, the people who were wrong most were the people who were teaching algebra. The elementary school teachers actually got it right most often. And why? Because they're most like the students. Their algebra is kind of like not something that they were really comfortable with either. So we have a big banner in our lab. Oh, this work was done by my colleagues Ken Kadinger and Nathan. They've done this study multiple times, looking at the effects of expertise on being able to do representation. So we have a big banner in our lab that says, the student is not like me. So whenever we're designing environments, we have to always be trying to figure out how to get at where the student's coming from, not where we as experts are. Okay, so that was a little tangent into why I think learning research is still really important to do. But now let me just go back to a quick review. So what we're doing in OLI, we apply learning science research and the scientific method for course development, implementation, and evaluation. We develop these interactive learning environments, and we do that collaboratively with all these different kinds of experts. And then we provide these feedback loops for continuous improvement to these different stakeholder groups. And then we also build up that community of use, evaluation, and development. So you might say, okay, that all sounds great as a model, but really, Candace, that seems like a lot of work. What difference does it make between doing this and doing the way we've always done course development? So there's been a couple, we do a bunch of studies, both the learning studies but also effectiveness studies. And the one that probably got the most excitement was this study that we did, we've done several times. The first time we published on it was this accelerated learning study in statistics. And so what we did is we took students, it was ended up, we did it at Carnegie Mellon, and students who were enrolled in the intro stat course for the following semester. I got their roster. My IRB would not let me just randomly assign them to condition. Go figure. But what I could do is send an email to the students enrolled in the intro stat course and say, we're going to do an experiment. If you want to be part of this experiment, log on to the SurveyMonkey and fill out all this information. And of the students who agreed to be in the experiment, we randomly assigned them to condition. So the control condition, or the traditional statistics course at Carnegie Mellon, meets 4 times a week. It uses a textbook, final, 3 midterms and a final, etc. The OLI condition met, and that's 15 weeks. The OLI condition met twice a week for 8 weeks. But they covered the same material in both courses. So 15 weeks, 4 times a week, 8 weeks, twice a week. In the 15-week condition, they had a traditional textbook and everything. In the OLI condition, no textbook. All they had was the OLI course. So the results of that was that, and we did pre-tests and post-tests on all conditions. So we actually had 2 control conditions, because we had the students who volunteered to be in the study and were assigned to the traditional condition. And we had the students who had just enrolled in the course, and when we asked them, do you want to be in the study, had just not opted into the study. So we had 2 control conditions: students who were just enrolled and didn't choose to participate, students who were just enrolled, chose to participate, and were randomly assigned to the traditional condition. And there was no significant difference on any performance measures between those 2 conditions. Now with the students in the, and then we used another research group's test to measure statistical literacy as the pre and post test. We didn't design the test. And then, so the results were that the students in the OLI condition edition actually showed statistically significant learning gains on the pre and post test that was not shown in the traditional edition. Students in the OLI edition did as well or better than the students in the 4 times a week, 15-week edition. We did do sampling during the semester about, okay, are these students just cramming because they've got to get this course done in 8 weeks? So we did sampling during the semester of how much time students were spending studying statistics, and there was no significant difference in the amount of out-of-class time students were spending on statistics, which is kind of interesting because the students in the traditional edition were actually spending more in-class time. So but anyway, there was no significant difference in out-of-class time. And then we also brought them into, when the semester ended for the one group in March and for the other group in May, the following fall, we brought a sampling from each group into our lab and gave them again the test, the end of year test, as well as some other activities to assess their knowledge of statistics. And there was no significant difference between the gain in the 2 groups. So one of the concerns is if they learned it faster, they would lose it faster, but that didn't prove to be the case. And if you want to read about that, that study has been written up I can give you citations or go to our website and get citations for those studies. More recently, Bill Bowen, who was the former president of Princeton and the Mellon Foundation and now heads this other foundation called the Ithaca Foundation, saw what we were doing and said, okay, that's great for Carnegie Mellon students, but would it really work anyplace else? So he essentially got 2 states, New York, two state systems in New York and Maryland to run a controlled randomized test, which they ran, we didn't run it, in public institutions of, the flagships, but also the regionals and community colleges. And they basically got very similar results. And you can read, they published their report too. And this gets to me to what I think is really the value of the educational technology. To build better educational technology, we need to base it on really good learning theory. Unfortunately, learning theory, as I said, is still really young. And the way that we're going to refine our learning theory is to have a lot more data. A lot more data about a lot more students in a lot more contexts. And fortunately, we can use the educational technology to collect that data. So we can set up this virtuous cycle where we use what we think we know about human learning to design the technology, use the technology to collect the data, use the data to refine our theory. And it is this cycle that I believe is really what's going to help us address this sort of cost containment challenge that we have now in higher education. So that's just my little summary slide about what's so great about this. And then I always have to say thanks to my funders. So the Open Learning Initiative is funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the William and Gates Foundation, the Lumina Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, the Preston Foundation, the Walter S. Johnson Foundation, Carnegie Mellon, and then the National Science Foundation supports the Pittsburgh Science and Learning Center. And I'm going to close with a quote from Herb Simon, who was a Nobel laureate and an economist at Carnegie Mellon. And he said this, 15 years ago, that improvement in post-secondary education will require converting teaching from a solo sport to a community-based research activity. And that's what I'm really trying to foster is, and I actually think MOOCs are taking us in the wrong, I'll be honest, I think MOOCs are taking us in the wrong direction because they're not community-based research activities. They are reinforcing that individual, faculty, individual course broadcasted all over the world. So what I'm inviting people to do is once the MOOC mania dies down, to come back and actually work on collectively looking at how do we improve higher education. So that's it. So questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been a big fan of MOOCs, but I have been intrigued by them. And I live and work in Silicon Valley, where some of that is happening. But I wonder if we don't need both. Because one of the advantages of MOOCs is that you can reach people who otherwise would not be able to access, either because of where they're located spatially, or because they don't have money. And I really like your presentation too. And so I wonder if what we don't need to do is a multi-pronged approach, using each method where it's most appropriate.
Yes, exactly. And I said this at the beginning of my presentation,
Which I missed, I'm sorry.
that I'm at Carnegie Mellon right now, but in about a month, starting in the fall officially, I've accepted a faculty position at Stanford, which is kind of ground zero for MOOC world. And what I think is what's good about the MOOCs is they figured out how to use the technology to do massive scale. But it's massive scale of essentially lecture and short answer questions, which, as we all know, is not, or maybe you don't all know this, but I can tell you reams of research that tells you that's not the most effective way for people to learn. And so what I'm very interested in doing is blending two approaches. How do we do effective learning design and data collection at massive scale? So, maybe, and for some, how many people here have actually tried it? Okay, well, I have. And they're great for me. And I'm sure they'd be great for everybody in this room. Everybody in this room who already either has a college degree or even an advanced degree, or, that you already know how to learn by listening to a lecture and monitoring your own learning, all that metacognitive stuff I was talking about. Probably everybody in this room has really good metacognitive skills. You know when you're learning, you know what you need to know, you know how to manage your own learning. Most of the world, or most of the people that were trying to deal with this cost containment problem in this country, that's not the target, And so those folks going on to a MOOC, and here's my big concern. So I'm a person let's say I'm even in this country, and I never finished college, maybe took a couple classes, maybe never went to college, whatever. But my occupation has been outsourced or gone. I need to retrain myself. I'm struggling. I hear, I need a college degree to be able to get any kind of reasonable work. And so I might enroll in my local community college, but I'm not sure if I can really do college. It's kind of difficult, because I am still trying to feed my family, whatever. You get that picture. So here I go, okay, how about this? Stanford and these other places are putting the best faculty in the world, the best courses in the world, online for free. So my thinking would be, that's a low-cost way for me to see, can I do this? So I log into, I look at the little MOOCs, I can see something that I think might be kind of interesting. Data modeling, that looks kind of interesting. It says there are no prerequisites. Great, I don't have any prerequisites, I've been in college for 30 years. So I go in there, I listen to the first lecture. I have no idea what they're talking about. Okay, that's okay, because there's this discussion forum with peers, other students who are learning just like me, so I can post a question there. Now, the first question is, would that person, when they first hear that lecture and say, oh, this is, I totally don't get this, would they even persist to try and post a question? Maybe. If they, let's say they do, and they post the question, and then they get a response, and especially if it's like a computer science class, you get that kind of dynamic that happens where people are answering each other and nuancing each other, and don't really know how to answer the question for someone who's really a novice. So again, that communicates to that novice learner, I don't belong here. So I'm worried about the bigger cost of what it's communicating to people who are maybe trying to figure out, could I go to college? Could I participate in this level? And I'm being told that this is the best opportunity in the world, but really the scaffolding, the support isn't there for that person. That's my big concern about MOOCs, because the MOOCs were being advertised as if you're already highly well educated and you're just trying to find someone, either extend your knowledge in a field that you already know, or you're interested in dabbling and exploring continuing education in a field you haven't really explored yet, then this is a great place. It's like, continuing education for the privileged. It's great. But unfortunately, that's not what it's saying it's for. And so I think if it's going to say that the purpose of MOOCs is to democratize higher education, to really give education to quality of higher education to many, many people, then we need to think about what do we know about how people learn, and how do we design these massive environments so that it really supports people who are learning all across that variability. So, but I'm happy to hear other opinions or other thoughts. Yeah.
I have a question. I used to be a tutor in the Southwest State University, and I tutor economics and math. So we use a system called Activate.com.
Yes, yeah.
So the thing is, before we use Activate and after, the percentage of students who are performing really well didn't change that much. But good student did better with Activate, but a poor student didn't improve because of Activate. So do you have a solution for that?
Yeah, and that's so just any kind of technology looking like a tutor, that's what I mean about the surface features. What you really have to understand is those students that are struggling with that, just giving them another problem to do isn't necessarily what they need. You need to understand what it is they're struggling with. What's the concept that is just missing for them? And then be able to think about what kind of activity do I give them, activity or explanation, do I give them at that point in time to help them with that conceptual construct? And many of the commercial products that are out there don't go to that level of conceptual deconstruction. They think that, okay, I'm now teaching you how to find a point of competitive equilibrium. So I'm just going to give you a bunch of find a point of competitive equilibrium problems, and if you didn't get that one right, here's another one to do. Here's another one to do. And are assuming that if you just keep drilling them, somehow magically they're going to get it. Instead of saying, well, no, they'll learn how to solve that problem, so that when you give them that problem on a test, what they've learned how to do is solve that problem on a test, but they have not necessarily learned what you want them to learn. And that's why this is a much more sophisticated problem than people would have you believe. And that's why we need to, when we're collecting this data, to look at, what we're really looking at is what's the knowledge state of the student. And given their knowledge state at that point in time, what's the best thing to give them to support them next? And in fact, what we've seen from a bunch of research is that if someone's struggling with, say, competitive equilibrium, finding that point, once you've given them a couple problems and they can't do it, it doesn't help them to give them a third problem. That's not the best thing to do for them. The best thing to do for them actually is to stop and give them perhaps a worked example for them to, okay, you clearly don't know how to do this, let's walk you through how to do it. But then you have to have a way that you can, but then you want them to not just parrot the worked example, you want them to be able to explain why each of those steps is what they should do. So you give them the first step, and then you give them like a little pull-down menu that says, okay, why is this the first step? And you can give them like 4 or 5 different explanations that are based on what we hear students often saying, including the correct reason that you do that step, but there are often reasons students think you do that step that are common misconceptions. So you can give them those, and they can say, okay, I think we do this step because of this, and if it's wrong, you can give them immediate feedback and say, oh, you probably thought that was the first step because, and then you tell them what we understand is why that misconception is there, but this is why it's really not. And that has a different learning experience for the student. Then they go, oh, that is what I was thinking. Why isn't that not right? And then they're really learning something. I have students say to me, how did the computer know what I was thinking? And it's like, you know what, the computer doesn't know what you're thinking. But who does know what you're thinking is, students are unique, but they're not that unique. So in any given 80 students, you know that this is going to be a common misconception. And once we see it a couple times, we can just say, why is that a misconception? Oh, okay, and how do we address that? And we build up that storehouse. And then the computer can look like it knows what you're thinking, but all it's doing is looking at what you're doing and inferring from that what you're probably thinking. And that's the other reason why this needs to be a community-based research activity, because a single faculty member trying to collect that kind of detailed level data would take too many years. Sorry, I get all passionate about this stuff. Yeah.
So you use this as a supplement to on-campus courses at Carnegie Mellon, or is it totally online courses?
Thanks. I didn't answer. So the OLI courses are used at Carnegie Mellon, and they're also used at institutions. It's an open projects. So they get used at institutions all over the country, all over the world. And the way people use them varies a lot. Some institutions do use these as just online courses, and they have an instructor that, you know, monitors them and maybe meets with the students or, you know, uses other online communication technology. But mostly how they get used are in hybrid mode, where the instructor will say, instead of a textbook, and sometimes instead of TAs, just go ahead, sorry TAs, just go ahead and work through this module, and then they still have an in-class meeting. At Carnegie Mellon, they're all hybrid. And with faculty, senior faculty teaching members. And what the faculty found, well, this is interesting. When I first started this project at Carnegie Mellon, and I was running around trying to get faculty involved, to a department, they all said, okay, Candace, we're happy to do this for the world, but let's be clear, online education has no place at Carnegie Mellon. These courses will never be used at Carnegie Mellon. I said, fine. But we need to do some experiments, you know, so that we can look at effectiveness. Okay, we do it. Every single OLI course is now used in hybrid mode at Carnegie Mellon. Why? Because it changes what the faculty can do in the classroom. Instead of, like in our formal logic course, instead of spending the, you know, the class time going over for the 20th time how to do construct a proof, the students learn how to do all that outside of class. And then they can come into class, and their small classes, you know, 35-person classes, they can spend that time really exploring the expert faculty's area of interest. You know, and he's a good little expert, and he can talk about that in a really engaged way with the students that he couldn't do when he had to spend all his time, you know, helping them understand they're doing and or. So we never, when we started this at Carnegie Mellon, said, this Carnegie Mellon is changing, you have to do this differently. It's really been a pull by the students and by the faculty.
This is sort of what I think is the opposite side of the problem. You may not want to answer this or delve into it, but you know, one thing that strikes me is that so many faculty, I for example, trained as an agricultural economist, and I never was taught anything about education, or you know, basically I was on my own. I happened to be just down the road from where you're going to be, about 20 miles south of Santa Clara University. But you know, it strikes me that you know, one of the issues is that so many of our educators, our teachers, if they're really good, many times they just happen to be good at it. And you know, I think that you know, most of us, I could be wrong. I'm just looking around the room, and I know at least one person here who got a degree from Purdue, and probably trained you know, much like me. You know, we're very good at what we do in our discipline, but you know, we just sometimes it's individual effort, sometimes it's random chance, and we just happen to be good at it. But you know, it strikes me that in higher education, that we ought to put more effort into helping our educators understand the educational and the learning process. So that's sort of a comment. If you want to address it,
I agree with you, but I also think that there are different faculty all along the continuum on both how interested they are in this and how competent they feel, and they can be great researchers in their discipline, and you know, and I don't think that it's right to sort of say, okay, now all faculty have to, you know, fit some mold. What I think it's incumbent on us to develop tools and environments that sort of meet faculty at wherever they are on that continuum in such a way that it best supports them and supports their students. So, you know, there are some faculty that really, and that's why, I don't know if you were here when I showed our development process, but there are places where faculty can participate at all levels, you know, depending on their interest. Some faculty, you know, really get into this. It sort of triggers the research part of them where they're kind of like, oh, you know, understanding how my students think about equilibrium is a researchable question. You know, I just know that I've been teaching intro chemistry for 15 years, and I think the students get it. On the final, it looks like they get it. When they go to the follow-on course, they don't get it. They don't get it the way we want them to get it. It's so frustrating. And these are students at Carnegie Mellon, which are, you know, all got 800s on all the SATs. It's not like they're not competent. They just don't get it. And so it's like, okay, so clearly we need to understand what it is about how we're teaching it to them that they're not getting it, or how they're thinking, or how they're learning that they're not getting it. And we spend a couple months unpacking what do you really understanding equilibrium and looking at the progress of the reaction and what parts were sort of implicit in all the chemists' heads about, of course, that's obvious, but they never explicitly made that part of the process explicit to the students. The students were just trying to infer it and didn't infer that thing because they had no way to. And so when we unpacked it and redesigned the learning experience, we got a 60% increase on students getting it in a fundamental way that the faculty wanted them to get it. But you can't ask you can ask a chemist until they're blue in the face. They can't fix it. They don't know. That's why you need to put together these teams to get teams of faculty, but also learning researchers, people who can help them unpack their expertise, software engineers to say, how do we use the software to get that across? That's what I really believe that, and so faculty who are really engaged and want to do that, great. I want them on my development teams. But there are some faculty that are like, look, I just want students to get equilibrium. And I have my own research. I'm trying to understand theoretical chemistry. I don't have time to build a whole new research area in education.